Hello, and welcome to another message on the notions of your spiritual awakening, and where your body and mind and the connection to your soulful spiritual self is propagating as the energy of Earth are continuing to change. And so, in this message, I wanted to address the idea of separation and the notions behind what it means to leave the old you behind, the old notion of yourself apart from the being that is becoming your awakened self. And so the the sense of separation that you're feeling right now brings on a sense of confusion. It originates from a separation from something that is familiar, that you have always been accustomed to and used to living, and you're now facing this new reality that is potentially unknown to you, but the only thing you're able to feel is the panic of leaving the old behind. And so, to address that, to explain that, uh, your being propagating itself into the new shifts of the energies that are coming on board within you, is leaving and is separating itself from the old ways of living, the old ways of your being, the old ways of functioning. And through that separation, whenever you function in the three-dimensional state of your being, outside of your enlightened self, um, you start to draw confusion on the new realities that you're facing. So the confusion comes along with panic, and the two kind of coincide. And so what you see now, what you feel within yourself at this moment in time, is almost this balance idea between feeling enlightened and feeling whole and feeling you're finally connecting to something that is the truth of you, but at the same time, as you propagate and losing that connection from time to time, then you switch back and you fall into the patterns of panic, uh, because looking back into your past, or relying back onto the known reliable, is no longer an option. And so, how do you balance in? How do you shift in this new paradigm of living the new you and knowing the new you, but at the same time living uh, or propagating the comfort of knowing that the old you no longer exists? And so, the 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 answer, or the propagation of that, is to find balance, right? To find balance within yourself at any one moment or being. And the rhetoric, or the teachings I am propagating and have always been propagating, is you need to find balance of your being, the balance of yourself within, and through that balance, you'll be able to actively look back at the both scenarios of the perceived highs and the perceived lows, and know who you are at any one moment. And so that way, when you are feeling more connected, more enlightened into your self of being, to where you are one, what feels like with the greater energy of the whole, the unity consciousness, or your higher self, whatever you want to call that area, you can discern of what it means to be in that space, right? You can look into that space and you can see the availability of yourself being there, but not necessarily marry yourself or brand yourself as the awakened being of any kind. And at the same time, whenever you're balanced and then you happen to lose your tracking and then fall back onto the unknowns, to where you might not feel as enlightened or as connected or as in tuned with the greater knowledge of the truth. In those times, when you're more likely to fall into the pitfalls of panic, of hey, my old world no longer exists. Where do I even go from there? Within that balance, you'll be able to see that um, the old world no longer fits. The new world is just an idea of self. And the truth is, you exist between the balance of the old and the new. In fact, the old and the new technically are not there, and then you actually find your wholeness or your entire interpretation of self in this balance of being. So yes, technically from the multidimensional standpoint, you are rising and the paradigms are shifting and you are ascending higher into your greater knowing. But if you look at it from the three-dimensional sense of self, um, it does not exist as a way forward. It is not a thing that you can interpret and then brand as a higher state of existence or higher state of knowing or awakening or enlightening, right? That within itself puts a three-dimensional branding on the process. And so instead of branding yourself and feeling the highs and the lows or the panics and the ecstasy, the true enlightenment, the true path of your being actually exists in this balance, right? Where you are an observer looking down at your three-dimensional panic sense of self, and at the same time you're an observer looking at this three-dimensional chase of what you would consider enlightenment, but in fact um, exists in stillness and exists in nothing. And so um, that balance, that balance of existence, is um, what needs to be attained and what will be attained. And then from there, you will see that the observation can exist both in to the higher realms of existence and both to the lower realms of existence, but without any branding or attachment to yourself or to your outcomes, right? And so within that non-attachment, within that stillness and sense of observation, and then lack of branding between the highs and the lows, you'll be able to step in and conjoin yourself with unity. And that is kind of where that sweet spot lays, and in just knowing of the truth, but not being one in the truth. Knowing the sense of old paradigms, but not being one with the sense of now I'm away from the old, right? So you're existing in this balance between knowing how things were and knowing that you existed in the past, but not being one with it, but simply knowing and observing the fact that that is an existence of self that still functions and propagates forth. Um, and then on the other end of it, you can know the general ideas behind life and enlightenment and um, and higher being. You can know those as concepts, but not marry yourself into the three-dimensional chase of those items. And so the highs and the low exist in this duality and in this polarity. And so the conversation of enlightenment, the conversation of reaching your true potential, almost cannot exist in a three-dimensional way of thinking or three-dimensional way of being, right? And so once you realize that all conversations cease to exist, and all actions cease to exist, um, once you reach the point of self-actualization that you can perceive from in a three-dimensional sense, but not necessarily know um, the recipe towards it, right, or the steps towards it. And the only thing you can feel is you can feel yourself kind of connected to it or kind of completely not connected to it. But within that state, you're still very much in a three-dimensional interpretation of your being. And so stillness, how do you find stillness? How do you find your being without attachments or without interpretations and marriages to any one sense of being or any one ways of being or ways of living? Um, and and that And so that stillness originates from the internal knowing of your heart center, that you can then connect to the greater external knowing of you, right? So almost like your three-dimensional sense of a heart would expand itself out into the multidimensional state of you. And again, I'm expressing this in the three-dimensional terms, but no three-dimensional explanation would would be able to provide that as a recipe forward. But I'm extrapolating the multidimensional interpretation of yourself now. So your three-dimensional heart space, your three-dimensional enlightened self, so that being where the energy flows through you and you feel the sense of awe and the sense of that tingling sensation, right? So that expanded state of being, right, within your three-dimensional state. So that is how it would feel in this state and form. Then would extrapolate itself out past your body, so past your 3D sense of being, and then connect itself with the same, literally quite the same version of you as a multidimensional being, right? And so through that connection, you can use your heart center as the way to access that field. And you can use your heart center as an interpretation of frequency that you can use as kind of a roadmap into your multidimensional self of being. And so once you reach your multidimensional existence or multidimensional comprehension, obviously, um, in your three-dimensional way of being, you are still very much in a 3D space, reaching your multidimensionality. Um, and so that would be your initial interpretation of what it means to be interpreting yourself from the multidimensional standpoint. But once you use your heart center energy, right, that interpretation of frequency to enter into the slight touching of your multidimensional being, from there you will be able to kind of use that as a roadmap forward to, oh, this is how it feels to be in stillness. This is how it feels to be in oneness. This is how it feels to be connected to my multidimensional being without three-dimensional attachments of self. And so where this is going, where the roadmap is taking you, is basically to more and more interpretation of your multidimensional self, um, without definitions, without any kind of attachments, without any kind of beliefs or assumptions or concepts, where you can just be still. And so the observer state that you have been able to feel already would then transcend itself into the interpretation of your multidimensionality. And so that is the next step of your evolutionary process. And so um, what to do now is to simply find stillness, so that stillness, not from the sense of a chase that you would interpret it from your three-dimensional standpoint, right? So your humanoid three-dimensional interpretation of this would be, oh, look, what do I do to find stillness? And then you would seek stillness through actions and and perceived necessary shift of self in order to make something happen or something not happen, when in fact that would be a misinterpretation of stillness. And so the stillness then would rest and would sit. And you're knowing that you're continuing to interpret yourself in your three-dimensional form. You're knowing that you can be an observer to your actions and to your being from ideas of multidimensionality. And then once you interpret yourself as an observer and you can kind of start to see, engage the world around you from that standpoint, you will reach the point of stillness where then through your heart center, you'll be able to connect to your true notions of multidimensional living. Um, that is not to be saying that you're off somewhere else flying in this invisible field and things are things are happening, or you're somewhere else, or you're something else, um, you're still here. You will always be here, but you will be here in a reinterpreted state of being. And that is probably as far as I will go for this particular video. I will build on this as yourself continues to upgrade and continues to be able to touch the essences of you. But that is the interpretation of self as we stand right now. Is your observer state leads to the heart functionality of open heart space, to where through the energetic interpretations, then you can touch a multidimensional being. So keep on centering, keep on finding stillness within, not chasing things, not doing things for the sake of doing things, not doing things for the sake of enlightenment or the sake of difference or the sake of change. um, Simply doing things as your heart leads you into your life, right? And so acceptance of things as they are is also another key component here, is realizing that things are shifting, things are propagating, things are being left behind, things are being discovered. But again, from the observer standpoint of view, allow that to take place and simply surrender into the love of every single moment and every single interpretation of yourself, to allow that to happen. Not to push it, not to chase it, but just allow yourself to bloom. And so blooming will happen in the most incredible way. Thank you for listening.